Hi there, this is Melissa Schiefelbein, board certified behavior analyst and parent of a child on the spectrum. Today we're going to talk about preparing for the dead zone. So what do I mean by the dead zone? The dead zone is the time of the school year and the time of the therapy treatment year that I like to call the dead zone. It's a lapse of time between about March to the end of April, possibly May. This is when it starts to get a little bit warm out, but you have some warm days, some cool days. And this is also for early childhood education teachers and therapists, times when you have no time off. There aren't any breaks. You have a while before spring break is coming up. You have everybody's coming down off of Valentine's Day, and you've had a holiday pretty consistently up until this point. What happens during this time and why is it important? Now, for your practitioners, for possibly your parents, and for your teachers, you're going to get this time where it's kind of a burnout, where there's kind of a lack of motivation, a little bit of blah. Everybody's itching to go outside, and you might be able to, or you might not be able to. You've been cooped up for quite a few months now. So you've kind of been at the grind for a little bit, and now it's just gotten to a point where it's just trudging along. So what do you do in this time? This time that seems like it's a little bit begrudging for practitioners and adults and teachers is actually golden time for parents, because this is when you can really buckle down and start working on, one, routines, because there won't be a break in routine for a while, but two, you can start to really hone down on what I like to call flexible contingencies. The bottom line is this is a very confusing time a lot of times for children on the spectrum, primarily children who are nonverbal, because outside time is such a hot commodity, and sometimes it's available and sometimes it's not. So this is a really good time to work on those contingencies of sometimes being available and sometimes not. So this is a good time for you to hone in on your skills and your routines, while teachers might be getting a little bit burnt out and a little bit into the grind. You also have IEPs coming up. So this is a really good time for you to flex your parent muscles and really get to work on something that I feel is super important with kids on the spectrum. The main thing that I really want to stress in this time where you don't have a ton of breaks is teaching the concept of available versus not available. So this is a huge time for children who utilize visual schedules, for kids who really are into routine, and for kids who have these big, huge reinforcers of going outside or getting into kind of outside play for sensory breaks. So here's what I mean by that. Because you have this huge chunk of time that no time is really being taken out for holidays or breaks, this is a really good time to teach a visual schedule. And for those of you who are just tuning into kind of the ABA realm or behavioral realm, even OT, a visual schedule is a way to establish a routine using pictures or visuals that clue the child into, this is what we just did, this is what's next. And a lot of children on the spectrum thrive from this. They love the predictability, they love the routine, but what happens when something is out of order or not available? So this is a really good time for you to start teaching that sometimes things are going to be on this schedule and sometimes they're not. A visual schedule can be incredibly beneficial for a child on the spectrum, because we're teaching how to predict things that are coming up, how to prepare, and we're teaching that there's kind of a cause and effect. Once I'm done with this thing, I move on to the next thing, and then I move on to the next thing. Sometimes that can put us in a really bad bind though, because what happens when, like I said, that gets out of order, things get shifted around, or we plan to go outside today and it's raining. So this is a really good time to start teaching what I like to call the available to not available contingency, to avoid getting into a structure that's so well thought out and so established that it starts to work against you. This is where I become a huge believer in teaching. Sometimes this is available and sometimes it's not. Now this can look really different. You can have visuals that clue a child into, hey, this is available, you can go outside, by having like a go sign or like a green circle. And the green circle being on the door means it's time, you can go outside if you want to. But then having a red circle or a stop when that's not available and it's not time to go outside. And sometimes this will be met with some behavior and sometimes it won't. We want to utilize this feature of a visual schedule of teaching when something's available versus not available, mainly because anything that we put into place. So if you do have a visual schedule, we want to start shifting it over into a natural contingency or something that happens on its own. So in real life, like if you're thinking everyday life without any support, you can have the best laid out schedule, and sometimes it'll work out, everything works out as you planned, and sometimes it doesn't. So what the available versus not available is going to help you teach is sometimes the plan is going to work out the way that you think it is, and sometimes it's not. And what is happening today might not necessarily be relevant tomorrow. That can shift into something that the child as an adult will encounter on his or her own. Because sometimes your schedule gets shifted one day, but then the next day it doesn't. So we want to throw in some of that kind of available, not available, could be today, could be tomorrow kind of contingencies, because then later on down the road, we start to teach flexibility. Teaching flexibility is invaluable in the autism world. We have to start teaching really early on in a way that we can kind of control. And I say manipulate, I don't mean manipulate in ways of you have all the power and you're just kind of making things, you're orchestrating everything, but you can change the variables a little bit. You can change the amount of time that something is available versus not available. I really love this kind of practice when it comes to screen time too. Like, hey, you can have your iPad, it has the green circle on it where it's available, you're good to go. But then there's certain times of the day where it's not available and you have to choose something else. We have these snacks, and sometimes these snacks are available and you can have, however many is appropriate, and then sometimes they're not. We're not teaching that because I'm saying no this one time, that I'm saying no for good. I'm just saying it's not available right now. The earlier you can teach that, the better. And this chunk of time that I like to call the dead zone is the perfect time to start implementing that, because you can do it on a consistent basis. You have this big, huge chunk of time where you're not all that busy and your child is not all that busy. You're not preparing for the next celebration. You're not preparing for the next holiday or break where there's going to be time off. So really use this time to your advantage. Use this time to hone in. I want to be working on this, teaching what's available and what's not, because that's going to be pretty critical, especially when you start to have breaks over the summer. If you're going on vacation, this is a really good time to work on available versus not available, because you won't have access. If you take your child somewhere besides the home, you don't have access to the same things, and some things might be available and they might not. This is a great time for timers to come into play. So maybe something is available during a certain amount of time, and once that time is up, then it's not. This is also a good time for different visuals to show the spans of time. So at first, the concept of time and something being available for a limited amount of time might be really abstract, but if we can show visually a way of that time going by up until the point where it's available again, then we assist the child in understanding that sometimes things are available for a short amount of time, sometimes they're long, but they're always available again. I think a lot of times when we deny access to a child, some of the reasons that we get such kickback is because the child is assuming that it's just a permanent no. You don't ever get to have it again. And we don't have a way to explain, we don't have a verbal relationship with the child to be able to say, no, you can have this, just not right now. In fact, a lot of times we use those words, not right now, no, thank you, not right now. But what does that mean to a child? We have to show, hey, there are times when this is going to be open as an option for you, and then sometimes it's not. Very important. One of the lessons that I want to instill upon all parents on the spectrum that I had to learn is that we want to teach flexibility over compliance. Compliance means there's a set thing of tasks for you to do, and you're going to do all of them, and you're going to comply to them. If we teach flexibility, then we teach these things that are assigned for us to do today can change, and that's okay. We have to teach that end part, and that's okay. If that changes, you're still going to probably access reinforcement at some point during the day, and that doesn't mean it changes forever, and it's not gonna rock your world so much because we've prepared and we've reinforced you being flexible. One way that I like to train this up really, really well is I like to choose things that are not a huge deal and really reinforce the flexibility on them. So take, for example, if your child has a favorite snack and we start to say, hey, I'm gonna serve your favorite snack, instead of having it in the package that it comes in, I'm gonna give it to you in a Ziploc bag. And instead of seeing a regular goldfish package, you have goldfish that's in a Ziploc bag. And if you do that and you tolerate it without having kind of negative behaviors toward it, I'm going to make the biggest deal out of it. Like, yeah, that's so cool. They look a little bit different, but you're using them, and that's great. And then slowly transition to some bigger things like, hey, I said we're gonna go outside after we eat lunch, but we're gonna do this really quick thing first. We're just going to go visit the bathroom real quick before we go. And that's okay. And we're gonna celebrate the fact that you did it. So once you start teaching flexibility and really celebrating them in small instances, then you can really celebrate them when they happen for bigger instances. That's my main takeaway from this video, is we want to teach our children flexibility over compliance. The last thing that we could do over the dead zone is key into some of those kinds of skill acquisition behaviors that are gonna take more time than others. So potty training, sleep training, feeding training, anything that takes a chunk of time. I'm talking like several days, possible weeks. Think about those times, get really prepared for them. For instance, let me give you an example. When we do potty training in the home, I typically suggest having a time when the parent's not working and the child's not in their everyday school or active therapy sessions. So you have a time, like a couple of weeks, where it's just you and your child at home all the time. And you can drop everything, not schedule anything, and this is the time that you're going to be working on potty training exclusively. So this is the time when you can really start preparing for that. You can start planning out what you're gonna do, mapping everything out, getting all the resources you need ready, and choosing the time that you're going to implement that training. So I like to call this kind of your strategizing time. So where you can start to pick up on the routines and what you're going to need in order to implement the training, so that way when it comes up, you're good to go. So in conclusion, preparing for the dead zone, this is your time as a parent to get your game face on and really think about teaching flexibility in routines and schedule ahead of time before your child needs to use it. You always want to practice stuff before you need to use it. Teaching flexibility over compliance and preparing for those longer term skills. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this. We'll be doing lots of stuff like this in future videos. And please visit us at bloomhealth.org to book a session and figure out how this works for you specifically. We'll see you again soon.